I'm Ken Robinson, and I want to offer my welcome to all of you to the Atlantic Rim Collaboratory in Reykjavik. I'm really sorry not to be with you. I have a really good reason. I'm in New York, or should be when you're watching this, speaking about the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations. I've been involved in the world's largest lesson, so I have to be there for an event. But I really would like to be with you in Reykjavik. I'm delighted that the Collaboratory is meeting, and I'm really very pleased to be part of it and looking forward to how these discussions evolve over time. In my 10 minutes, I want to say a couple of things. One is that we're going to get down to some pretty detailed practical work as the discussions continue over the coming months. But I wanted to, from my own point of view, set out a couple of principles which I think should underpin the change that we need to see. You see, I really do feel that the work of this collaboration is going to prove to be very important for the participating systems, which are very various and diverse, but also there's a real need for leadership now to show other systems around the world what can be achieved and why things should move in a different direction in terms of provision in schools and how we think about learning and teaching particularly. So I want to say a few words about those principles and to say that there's a need, as I see it, to change metaphors in the way we think about education. There's a big difference, isn't it, between learning and education, and there's a paradox here as well, which is that kids love to learn, but they don't all like being educated. For a lot of them, the problems start when they go to school. When I say kids love to learn, if you think of it, children are really extraordinary learning organisms. I mean, think what they do in the first couple of years of life. They learn to speak, for example, which is the most fantastic accomplishment. And nobody teaches them how to do it. You simply couldn't teach your child to speak. It's far too complicated. And you wouldn't have the time and they wouldn't have the patience. You don't sit your child down at the age of 18 months and say, look, you probably noticed that your mother and I have been making all these noises for the past 18 months. Well, some of these are the names of things. We call them nouns, and you need to learn about 5,000 of them in the next couple of years. Other of these sounds are the names of things you can do with things. We call them verbs, and if you change the noise you make a little bit, you can say what you're planning to do with these things and what you have done with these things in the past. And don't worry about the subjunctive, it's far too complicated. Now, it doesn't work that way at all. Kids absorb language through their skin, and they may absorb several languages. I'm sure in some of your systems, you know many examples of kids who speak 4 or 5 languages maybe because they were brought up with them. So kids have a tremendous appetite to learn. The problems seem to develop when we send them to school. And I'm not speaking critically of individual schools or teachers at all, but there's something in the rhythms of education, something in the systems that we've created that eventually start to wear away at kids' curiosity, they wear away at their motivation and their appetite for learning. And so you find that by the time they leave elementary school, certainly by the time they're in secondary school, many kids are disengaged, bored by what's happening, and they far too often suffer from stress and end up leaving the system entirely. Now, I think these have been long-term problems in schools, and they're to do with the curriculum and how we think about teaching and learning. But they've been made very much worse, in my view anyway, in recent years by the emphasis on competition and standardization that has swept many education systems. Most systems in the world are being reformed, as you know, and it's a global movement. And Pasi Sahlberg, who I'm delighted also to know as part of this initiative, refers to this very winningly as the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM, and it certainly seems to have been contagious. System after system has adopted approaches to school improvement based on competition, standardization and testing. And the evidence is it doesn't work very well, even if it works at all for the things it's being targeted on. The US, for example, has spent billions of dollars literally on commercial testing programs over the past 15 years and seen no improvement ready to speak of in the areas that the tests have been directed to. I think this is a failed experiment, and we should recognize that and understand that it's based on a false premise. It's based on the premise that education is in some ways still an impersonal process, that it can be improved by standardizing and removing the human factor. And the truth is, it simply can't be. So I believe we need to make a big shift in the way we think about education, and it has big implications for policy. When I say there's been a an industrial element to education, let me be a bit more specific. I talked about this at some length in a book I published last year called Creative Schools. I wrote the book, incidentally, because I had, as you know, a lot of responses to a talk I gave at the TED conference about 10 years ago. And people say, we like what you say there, but some people say you didn't tell us what we should do about it. And well, I have a number of responses. One of them is, it was 18 minutes, give me a break. But there is a lot to say about how schools are changing, how they should change, and how they can be helped to change. And we have some leading experts in these processes as part of this initiative. The big shift, I think, has to go from seeing education as I say, an industrial process to an organic one. Let me just say what I mean by that. Education systems, for the most part, grew up within the Industrial Revolution, and they share some of the features of industrial production. They are standardized, they're based on conformity, they're very linear in the way they operate. But I think that the real metaphor is not so much with industrial manufacturing as with industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture also developed during the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries especially. And it was made possible by three developments. One of them was mechanization, which made it possible for the first time to cultivate vast tracts of land very quickly comparatively, and to turn them over to single crops. So monoculture became a big piece of this. So there were cabbages as far as the eye could see, potato plants as far as you could see, bananas as far as you could see, whereas previously we used to have mixed crops and rotational systems. The second big innovation in industrial agriculture was the development of chemical fertilizers, which made things grow bigger, faster. We applied the same principles to the industrial growth of animals, where we've been pumping them full of hormones. And one of the reasons for this, and apart from the fact we could, was that in industrial systems the emphasis is on yield or output, on quantity as much as quality. And the third development was pesticides, because these systems, for the most part, were deprived of the natural process of self-protection. So pesticides were needed to keep away pests and so on, and to protect the crops. Now, it kind of worked, except that it's destroying the environment, it's polluting water systems, and it's eroding topsoils. And this is really important, I think, because the emphasis in agricultural systems in the Industrial Revolution turned to output and to the plant. And the price we've paid is the erosion of soils. Organic farming is based on the opposite principle. Organic farmers, to begin with, promote diversity. They look at the health and ecology of the whole system, but the emphasis is on the soil. If you get the soil right, the plants will grow and be healthy. And these are sustainable and natural processes. Well, I think what's happened in our education systems is we've become preoccupied with yield and output in just the same way as we have in industrial processes, with data-driven outcomes. And along the way, we've lost sight of the natural process of teaching and learning. And in doing that, we've eroded the culture of education, the culture of learning. So I think we need to change metaphor and see education as a human process where children and students flourish under certain sorts of conditions, and our job is to create those conditions in schools. What that means is, and that's what I try to argue in Creative Schools, is that we need to get back to basics, as we keep saying. We need to look at how children learn, why they learn, what they should learn, and then look at creating the optimum conditions in schools where they want to learn and where teachers are enabled to help them to do that. There's an ecosystem. Our job is to facilitate teaching and learning, to encourage teachers in their roles of doing that. The role of a school is to create a climate where schools and teachers together can achieve that. The role of districts and of nations is to create an overall political climate where those conditions are encouraged. In other words, the real shift in education has to come from the ground up as well as from the top down. And unlike GERM, where the emphasis is on command and control, I think our emphasis has to be on climate control. We're living in a world where the climate is changing physically around us. We need another cultural climate in education so we're equipped to deal with these changes and make the most of our natural resources. That's what Creative Schools is about. It's what I think the big shift has to be, and it's why I'm so excited to be involved in this whole process from the Atlantic Rim. I think there's a big opportunity here, not just for the systems who take part, as I say, but to inspire a different way of thinking about education globally. And that's the excitement and the challenge of this initiative. Thank you.